family of Simone Jasmine, better known as the Queen of the South, has rubbished claims that she was involved in murder or attempted murder. Jasmine's believed to have led a ruthless drug gang in Wentworth, Durban.
October 29th, 2020. Late afternoon, Wentworth, south of Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. A 29-year-old woman steps out of her home on Marine Drive. She is calm. She is careful. She has been careful for months now. She no longer uses her own vehicle. She no longer follows a routine. She gets other people to book her rides. She never confirms her destination out loud. She has survived 2 previous attempts on her life. She has navigated a world that kills most people who enter it. Today, she has asked a relative to book an e-hailing ride. The car arrives. She walks toward it. She checks the confirmation. She opens the passenger door. She gets in. Then a second vehicle, dark, tinted windows, engine idling, pulls up alongside. A window drops. The passenger door of her ride is yanked open from the outside. A man with a firearm leans in. 6 shots, fired at close range, twice in the chest, 3 times in the stomach, once in the thigh. 1 bullet punctured her heart. That was the one that killed her. By the time emergency services arrived, Simone Muriel Jasmine, known to the streets of Wentworth as Mani, known to the headlines as the Queen of the South, known to investigators as the alleged founder and leader of one of the most dangerous drug operations in KwaZulu-Natal history, was already gone. She was 29 years old. No arrests have ever been made for her murder. The CCTV cameras that should have captured the shooting suffered technical failure. The getaway vehicle was found 2 days later, stripped and torched in an industrial lot. Every lead reached a dead end. The case went cold. But the story did not end there, because in the world Simone Jasmine built, the story never ends with one body. And tonight, on Africa Daily Cold Case Files, we are going to go all the way back to the beginning. We are going to walk you through what she built, how she built it, who wanted her dead, and what her death revealed about the underworld she ruled, and about the city that allowed that underworld to thrive. This is the investigation into Simone Jasmine. To understand Simone Jasmine, you must first understand the Barracks. Not a military installation, a complex of council flats along Lansdowne Road in Wentworth, a suburb south of Durban, wedged between an oil refinery, the Indian Ocean, and decades of apartheid-era spatial planning that concentrated colored communities in South Africa's most economically marginalized zones. The name came from the military-style housing blocks apartheid architects designed for the community before relocating them there. The residents kept the name. They keep it still. Wentworth, by the time Simone Jasmine came of age there, was already a community under siege. Not from outside, from within. The gang wars that had consumed the area for years were not random. They were the product of economics, unemployment, poverty, a heroin trade that had transformed from loose powder and plastic straws to precisely manufactured pharmaceutical-grade capsules, production-line narcotics, cheap enough to undercut a loaf of bread, potent enough to destroy a neighborhood. This is where she grew up. This is where she learned. Investigators who later studied her rise describe her as not just street smart, but intelligent. Her entry into the trade followed a familiar path. She fell in love with a man connected to a local gang. He was a street dealer. He taught her the business. She learned quickly. Then he was shot dead in a rival gang hit, and something shifted inside Simone Jasmine. Most people who lose a partner to gang violence either leave or grieve quietly and endure. Simone did neither. She took over the street corner he had been working. She did not report to anyone. She created her own structure. She named it the cartel. And she did not look to Wentworth's existing gang landscape for her blueprint. She looked at a television screen, specifically a Mexican telenovela, Queen of the South, a show about a woman named Teresa Mendoza who loses her drug lord boyfriend and rises from poverty to build her own vast narcotics empire. Simone studied it. She modeled her operation on it. She adopted the title. She embraced the mythology, and then she made it real. Investigators would later note that this was not vanity, it was strategy. Simone Jasmine understood something that most of her rivals did not, that perception is power. If people believe you are the queen, you do not always have to prove it with violence. Sometimes the name does the work for you. But sometimes, in this world, you have to prove it anyway. Within a few years, the cartel was no longer a street corner operation. It was a supply chain. Police sources who tracked her rise described what she built in terms that belong in a business school case study, if that business school taught narcotics distribution and violent market enforcement. Unlike most of the men who surrounded her, Simone Jasmine did not want to be a dealer. She wanted to be a wholesaler. The distinction matters enormously. A dealer stands on a corner and takes all the risk for relatively small margins. A wholesaler sits at the top of the supply chain, provides product to multiple dealers across multiple territories, takes a cut from every transaction, and keeps her hands clean of the street-level exposure. That was her model. Within a few years, the cartel was supplying heroin to dealers across Umlazi, Lamontville, and KwaMashu, three of the largest townships in the province, each with its own gang landscape, its own territorial politics, its own violence. Police estimated the operation was generating approximately 200,000 rand a week. Some sources place that number higher on peak weeks. The product itself tells a story about Durban that the rest of the country has not fully reckoned with. By the time Simone Jasmine's operation was at its peak, Durban had become the only city in all of southern and eastern Africa where heroin was widely sold in capsule form. Pharmaceutical-grade capsules, the kind that look like over-the-counter medication, filled with heroin, manufactured on automated capping machines capable of producing 25,000 capsules per hour. A single kilogram of heroin could yield 25,000 capsules, valued at close to 400,000 rand. The machines themselves cost around 250,000 rand. The economics were brutal and simple. Extraordinary profit, extraordinary violence, and a street price of approximately 15 rand per capsule, cheaper than a loaf of bread. This is the market Simone Jasmine dominated, and she invested her returns, property, Uber taxis, a decision of particular operational brilliance since controlling vehicles meant controlling transport, which meant controlling logistics, which meant controlling the movement of both money and product. She was not flamboyant. Police sources consistently note this. She drove an old Opel Corsa. She did not Instagram her lifestyle. She did not host lavish parties for the connected and the powerful. She paid the electricity bills of families in the barracks. She organized birthday parties for children. She handed out food hampers. She paid school fees. She was, by the account of people who lived under her protection, something the community had learned not to expect from anyone: present. But presence in Wentworth has a price, and the price the Barracks paid for Simone's protection was living inside a weekly target. Drive-by shootings, rival gang retaliations, walls scarred with bullet holes, residents who knew to put their mattresses against the windows at night, children who understood the difference between warning shots and hunting shots by the time they started primary school. That was the reality underneath the food hampers. In the world Simone Jasmine occupied, expansion was survival. Stand still and rivals consumed you. But every new territory she entered was a new set of enemies. The conflict with the Umlazi taxi industry is where the fatal pressure first became clear. Simone had brokered a supply agreement with dealers linked to powerful taxi bosses in Umlazi, a deal that extended her distribution network but also bound her to a network with its own hierarchy, its own disputes, and its own code of violent enforcement. The agreement collapsed over a drug transaction that went wrong. A member of the Umlazi group died in the aftermath, allegedly shot by the cartel and his body dumped in a field. The taxi bosses responded the way this world always responds. They sent a man to the barracks with an AK-47. Simone was not there that day. She survived by absence. But the message was received, clearly, permanently. Simultaneously, within Wentworth itself, the cartel was locked in an escalating conflict with at least 4 other gangs: the Hollywood Gang, the Drain Rats, G-Section, and the Destroyers. Each had territorial claims, each had blood debts to settle. The Wentworth that Simone ruled was not peaceful. It was merely ordered under her authority, and order enforced through fear is only as stable as the fear itself. Then came the moment that changed everything. The KwaZulu-Natal Anti-Gang Unit, a recently established specialist unit with a very specific mandate to dismantle organized gang structures in the province, began to move on her. They had been watching, building a file, mapping the network, and in late 2020 they found the thread that unraveled everything. A police officer, Warrant Officer Brian James, stationed at Wentworth Police Station, according to investigators linked directly to the cartel. The anti-gang unit swooped on the police station in September 2020. They arrested James in front of his colleagues. They arrested Simone Jasmine along with 5 others on charges of murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder, stemming from a shooting in July 2020 at Gulmall Crescent in Wentworth. And then something happened that the court papers confirmed, and that police sources say lit the fuse that ultimately killed her. Simone was granted bail. Her 5 co-accused were not. In a world built entirely on loyalty and paranoia, that single fact that she alone walked out was a sentence, not a legal one, a sentence from the street. Her co-accused, locked in cells, began asking questions that had only one kind of answer in that world. From that moment, Simone Jasmine was no longer fighting only the enemies outside the cartel. She was fighting the suspicion of the people inside it. She knew this. She moved differently. She changed her patterns completely. She stopped using her own vehicles. She stopped following any routine. She trusted almost no one. She got relatives to request her rides so the booking could not be traced directly back to her. For 6 weeks, it worked. Then came October 29, 2020. Investigators reconstructed what happened on Marine Drive in the final minutes of Simone Jasmine's life from witness statements, shell casings, forensic evidence, and the limited CCTV footage that survived. or was allowed to survive. The assassins had been staking out her home. This was not an opportunistic killing. It was planned, patient, professional. They had studied her movements long enough to know she was using e-hailing vehicles. They waited for the booking to be confirmed. They waited for her to walk toward the car. The driver confirmed her identity. She was distracted for a second. Enough. The passenger door was yanked open by a man who had exited a second vehicle. He aimed a firearm at point-blank range and fired. 6 shots in under 2 seconds, each one placed deliberately. The first bullet entered her heart. By the physical evidence, that was the kill shot. The rest were confirmation, the signature of a professional execution rather than a panicked street shooting. The driver fled the vehicle. He later returned and drove her to hospital. It was already too late. She was declared dead from her wounds. The KZN anti-gang unit took over the investigation. On the street, every gang that had ever been touched by the cartel immediately became a suspect. The list was long. There were the Umlazi taxi bosses, who had a declared war with her. There were the rival Wentworth gangs, who had been fighting the cartel for years. There were the imprisoned co-accused, who had every reason to feel betrayed and every connection to arrange a hit through lawyers, family, and street networks. There were corrupt officials who feared what she knew and what she might say to secure her own freedom. There were too many suspects, a detective close to the case reportedly said. It could be anyone. The CCTV cameras on Marine Drive suffered what investigators recorded as technical failure at the critical time. The forensic lab in KwaZulu-Natal, already burdened with a catastrophic backlog that has frustrated prosecutions across the province, was unable to process evidence at the speed the investigation required. The getaway vehicle was found clean, torched, stripped of every identifying feature. The case went cold. It remains cold. Here is the thing about a criminal empire built around a single architect. When the architect is gone, the building does not stand. It leans, it cracks, and then, piece by piece, it comes down. In the weeks after Simone's death, the network she had maintained through sheer force of personality and strategic control began to fracture. Supply routes were hijacked by rivals. Debts went unpaid. Members of her inner circle who had operated whole sectors of the cartel began to disappear, some into hiding, others into the same violence that had taken her. Rival gangs moved within days. The Hollywood gang, which had been held at bay by the cartel for years, seized territory. Smaller, hungrier operations from other parts of Durban pushed into the vacuum. The careful order she had maintained, brutal, yes, but ordered, collapsed into chaos. And for the ordinary residents of the Barracks, of Wentworth, of the communities that had lived under Simone Jasmine's particular brand of violent protection, the chaos was worse. Drive-by shootings intensified, innocent people caught in crossfire. A security guard holding his 8-month-old daughter shot dead in his doorway because he had shouted at gangsters to stop shooting near children. A family wiped out on Peters Road. Children learning to sleep with their beds pushed against the windows. Community activist Tracy Williams, who runs a food bank in the area, described it in terms that are almost impossible to reconcile with any notion of justice. Our community is riddled with fear. There is a drive-by shooting every second to third day. People put their mattresses up against the windows. That is the inheritance of the Queen of the South, not her empire, its absence. Because what replaces violent order is not peace. It is more violent disorder. Simone Jasmine's story does not exist in isolation. It exists within one of the most significant structural shifts in KwaZulu-Natal's criminal landscape in the last decade, and investigators who study the region understand that the shift she was part of began long before she arrived and continues long after her death. Durban's port is not simply a major South African harbor. It is, according to international narcotics analysts, a primary transit point for heroin flowing out of Afghanistan through Iran and Pakistan, down the Eastern African seaboard and into South Africa's domestic market. Global cartels use it, local syndicates compete for the supply that flows through it, and the invention of the heroin capsule, that pharmaceutical-grade product, cheap to produce, easy to disguise, impossible to distinguish from legitimate medication at a glance, turned what was a contained trade into a mass-market operation. Police estimate there are between 5 and 8 gangs competing for Durban's capsule trade, each trying to underprice and outmaneuver the others, each enforcing their territory with whatever firepower they can acquire. Into this landscape, Simone Jasmine positioned herself not as a street competitor, but as a supply chain node. She sold to everyone, or tried to. That strategy created her empire. It also created her enemies list. The deeper question, the one investigators and community activists have been asking for years without satisfactory answer, is why the structural conditions that produced Simone Jasmine, that nurtured her operation, and that have produced dozens of similar figures before and since have not been addressed. A veteran prosecutor in KwaZulu-Natal put it plainly: the 20 or 30 drug matters before me alone will not result in a trial. Every one of the cases will be withdrawn because of delays with lab tests. After 6 months of delays, the case is withdrawn because the delays infringe the rights of the accused. Criminals know they will get away with it, and good policemen feel hopeless. That is not a story about one woman. That is a story about a system. A forensic lab that cannot process evidence in time. Police officers embedded in the very gangs they are supposed to dismantle. Warrant Officer Brian James was not an isolated case, he was a symptom. Bail conditions that spring the leader while her co-accused remain inside, creating the exact internal suspicions that will ultimately get her killed. Every element of the system that was supposed to contain Simone Jasmine's operation contributed, in its failure, to the conditions in which it flourished. And the day she was killed, the day the Queen of the South was executed in the back of an e-hailing vehicle on Marine Drive, the system that failed to contain her also failed to solve her murder. That is not justice, in any direction. Her brother Troy said, after her death, "My sister had a heart of gold. What is being published in the papers is not true. She wasn't involved in any murders, and she was never convicted of anything. I don't understand why people are talking a whole lot of nonsense." Her mother Rose remembered a daughter, a woman who grew up in a community that offered very few exits and even fewer second chances. A woman who dated men who died one after another because the world she moved through consumed people at speed. A woman who, whatever else she was loved. A community member who knew the Barracks said of her generosity, "She paid electricity bills when families could not. She organized birthday parties for children. She bought school uniforms. She hired jumping castles. She put on Mother's Day and Father's Day events, fully catered. She was, to the people who lived in the Barracks, one of them, someone who had figured out how to survive in a world that was designed for them to fail." The price those residents paid for that generosity was living on a battlefield. That contradiction, the food hamper and the drive-by shooting, the same hand, the same supply chain, is not one that resolves neatly in any direction. A police officer who knew her operations from the inside offered a different assessment. He described a woman who had the personal trainer and the business mind, but maintained the image of someone struggling alongside her community, who hid product in the homes of residents, paying their bills in exchange, who would put a weapon in someone's face, ally or enemy, to make a point. Both of those people were Simone Jasmine. The contradiction is the point. Because when we only see the crime, we miss the community. And when we only see the community, we miss the crime. And both of those failures of seeing are exactly what allowed a 29-year-old woman to build a drug empire in plain sight for years in a suburb 20 minutes from Durban's city center. The investigation into Simone Jasmine's murder remains open, in the eyes of the South African Police Service at least. On the streets of Wentworth, it has long since been closed, by silence, by fear, by the understanding that asking questions in that world has a cost that most people cannot afford. The cartel still exists in some form, though no longer under the architecture she built. The war between the cartel and the Hollywood gang continued for years after her death, consuming more lives, more families, more futures. The heroin capsule trade continues. The port at Durban continues to be a conduit. The forensic lab backlog continues. The police corruption continues. And in the Barracks, in the block of flats on Lansdowne Road where Simone Jasmine grew up and built her empire and made herself into the Queen of the South, someone new has already claimed the corner. Drug deals happen in broad daylight. A lookout with a two-way radio sounds the alarm when police appear. The cycle that produced Simone Jasmine did not end with her assassination. It absorbed her, the way it absorbs everyone. She was 29 years old. She was out on bail on charges of murder and attempted murder when she was killed. She was due in court in 2 weeks. Her killers have never been charged. The CCTV footage is gone. The car is ash. The suspects are many. The answers are none. This is Africa Daily Cold Case Files. The case of Simone Jasmine, the Queen of the South, remains officially open. Unofficially, it will remain exactly what it has always been in Wentworth: unspeakable and unspoken. If you or someone you know has information regarding the murder of Simone Jasmine, contact the KwaZulu-Natal Anti-Gang Unit or the SAPS Crime Stop line 0860 010 111.